Hi, everybody, and welcome to Facilities Planning for your library. Today, we're going to go through a handful of things to talk about when you're thinking about your facility in general. And primarily, we're going to talk about the planning process. We're going to talk about construction projects, just general maintenance. I'll talk a little bit about procurement, some public bidding, a little bit of general advice, and then funding facilities projects. Towards the end, when we talk about the funding, Suzanne's going to give a little teaser about construction aid, but she has a workshop coming up relatively soon in the new year that's going to be all about the construction aid program. So she's just going to talk a little bit about that. So when it comes to facilities planning, you as trustees are required to maintain a facility which meets community needs. While various formulas exist for determining the appropriate size of the library, the final determination of adequacy rests in the hands of the trustees. So basically, this means that your library, one of those broad responsibilities that the board looks at, the physical plant is the responsibility of the trustees to make sure that A, it is complies with minimum standards, and B, is considered a resource for your community. You can define that resource however you would like. This can be done through planning exercises. It can be done through chatting with your community. It can be done through the reflection of your own services and programs that you have at your building. There's a handful of ways that you can determine that. But in this passage from the trustee handbook, which is on page 65, it says square footage is only one factor in deciding whether a library meets the community's expectations. Location, internal arrangement, accessibility for all patrons, environmental quality, and intangibles such as ambience all contribute to the overall adequacy of library building. Essentially, what this is saying is that your library building needs to be comfortable, accessible, and usable by your community. Many of our libraries are of the older generations. More than half of our libraries are older than 55 years old. So there's a lot of accessibility concerns across the system. In my mind, that should probably be one of your top priorities if you're in that area and you're able to focus on those things. But there's plenty of other things that we can take a look at too. The first thing I want to look at when we are talking about your facility is having some form of facilities plan at your fingertips that the board can use to be aware of all the projects that you're going to want to do over the next few years. You should take a look at this plan every year and figure out how much money it's going to cost moving forward to do various upgrades, replacements, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. So you know how much money you should either set aside in a reserve fund, or if you're going to have to increase your overall budget, you're going to want to know how much money is going to be required with that one. The board should have a facilities committee appointed, and they're tasked with overseeing the buildings and grounds, update the annual building plans, and suggest cost estimates to the full board on a regular basis. This is one of those standing committees that every library should have. This doesn't necessarily mean that you're in charge of getting all of this stuff done. It just means that you are in charge of tracking all of the information. And to help with that, I have some resources here, which I'll be sure to share this plan out. It's on the OWL Docs section of the trustee workshops. But on here, I have a facilities planning and project plan template. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that we should have some type of facilities plan up and running for the library. This is a pretty simple one. We have it here at the system, and Kelly Nemitz, our finance director, put this together for us. And essentially, all it is, and this is an Excel sheet, so you can just replace all your information if you want to use this one. But essentially, it has basically what the project is. We have all of our HVAC units listed over here. We have our roof, our driveway seal coat, the cooling system, the hot water tank, the furnace, generator, all this stuff that we have. And then when it was installed, so we know how old it is, and then each year what our estimates are for when we're going to have to upgrade it. And we know this because when we get our HVAC service or our HVAC unit serviced, they say you have X number of years left on this before you have to replace it. And we try to stack it. So if you look at we have 4 HVAC rooftop units, we have it staggered. So we're not spending $60,000 all in one year. We have it staggered. So it's 15,000 for every few years once that comes up. And then we have the total for that project. And then once we get every year, we build this out a little bit more so we never lose track of anything on here. And we'll put the last install or the last upgrade or something like that. So going through and thinking about all the mechanicals within your library and planning it out like this is going to be really helpful, because mainly above anything else, this helps with making sure that you're not going to come over budget with all your HVACs quitting in the same year, or if you are a few years out of when you were supposed to do a renewal, that's going to start to pile up on top of other things. So you really should plan it out and have an idea of when this stuff needs to be upgraded so you can take care of it as efficiently as possible. So I like this one. You may have some other type of layout that you like, but just putting the year and then the estimated amount, you can get estimates pretty easy. Just talk to a contractor. If they say your HVAC unit right now is probably going to cost $11,000, well, we're looking at fiscal year 2028. So we're just going to estimate. We're probably going to put a 2 or 3% increase every year, and then that'll be the total amount that we'll put in there. So as we talk to contractors, we get an idea. So these aren't 100% accurate numbers, but they're pretty close. And it just allows us to make sure that we're budgeting something, because it'll be a lot easier. So if this HVAC unit here comes back as $18,000, that's okay. At least we have most of it budgeted. So that's the thing. You don't want to wait for something to fail and not have the money for it. So planning it out like this can be really helpful. If you look at the bottom of this facilities planning Excel sheet, I also put just a template for, and this is just a simple project plan, because you may have maintenance stuff for like HVAC units or something like that, but you can also have like individual project plan for each one if you want. So maybe this is going to be called the HVAC upgrade plan. Okay. And then you just say the narrative is going to say replace 4 rooftop HVAC units. And then we put the costs in here, the rough phases, where we're going to get the money from, things like that. This can be helpful because you can just have a 1-page sheet of here's the project that I want to propose, or here's when we have to do it. This can be helpful because later on when we talk about funding, you can just use this information and put it right into the construction aid portal as well. So if we have any type of ongoing projects, I may fill something like this out to help us just in the planning phase. So these are just a couple of templates that you're welcome to use, but the key is to make sure that you have it planned out each year for what mechanicals you're going to have to do. And then if you have larger scale projects, to be able to write that up so you have kind of a better understanding of what it is that you're working on. So you can have that one. The other item that I have on here is just an assigned reserves policy, because when we're talking about those facility costs every year, it's a good idea to have some type of reserve fund that you can put your facilities items into. So at the end of the year, if you have leftover money or maybe you budget for it, you have some type of reserve fund. And right here for the system, so we have our capital improvement reserve. So these funds are established for large capital projects and general infrastructure replacement, such as HVAC, siding, roofing, beyond the scope of the annual budget needs. So this is a fund that we put money into at the end of every year. We budget for it just to make sure that we have those funds when we do actually have to go and do that work. If you put together that spreadsheet and let's say you look out like 5 years and you say this is going to be how much it's going to cost to replace all this stuff, and then you look at the amount that you're putting in your capital improvement reserve fund and you realize that you are under what you are supposed to have in that fund in order to afford all these things, it means that we're going to have to look budget wise to figure out how are we going to fund these various projects. So you have to, if you have reserve funds, you have to have a policy that goes with it. If you don't have a policy, you can go ahead and grab this one. I put it right on there for you, so you can edit this away if you'd like. But you should have one if you're doing any type of reserve funds that you have. Any questions on either of those points?
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
Is there any type of library that can't do that?
Nope, all libraries can set, what you mean, set a reserve fund?
Mhm.
Nope, you can set any type of fund that you would like.
Okay.
So there's limitations if you are looking at like, let's say, a capital improvement, or if you're doing like a capital campaign for fundraising, there's limitations on that one. But when you create your own funding, you're essentially just creating another line item in your budget where you're just kind of putting money away. There are limitations on the amount of money that you can have in reserve funds. So the Office of the State Comptroller, if you are audited, if you have too much money in there, they may say, well, you have an excess in the amount of your categorical reserve funds, and they may ding you for that. But I doubt that. I don't think you're going to run into that problem anytime soon, right, Jessica?
No, I mean, as long as you like have an idea of why, like if you have that whole plan laid out and they can see, oh, the reason they're saving up is because
Yep.
they have to replace their roof and it's $100,000.
Yep.
Just for an example, that's not really a thing here.
Yep.
But that would be something that would show the paper trail kind of thing.
Yep. And if you have that facilities plan along with that assigned reserves policy, and you have that line in your assigned reserves policy that says, we're going to have this money that we're going to use for capital improvement projects, and then your facility plan goes to support that. If anyone ever asks, you have both those documents that you can produce, so they're able to take a look and see what it is. Any other thoughts on that one?
I have a question, Ron.
Yeah, Lisa, what's up? Yep.
So just recently we started an emergency reserves line because we didn't want to have a separate capital reserves line because that enters into a whole lot of other issues that we didn't want to have to deal with. But in this case, is it a good idea to change that to assigned reserves and follow through with having the board approve the policy similar to yours?
So it would, a lot of it depends. It depends on, so the way that your reserve funds are defined are the way that you have to use them, right? So if you have an emergency reserve fund that you are creating, I would imagine that the descriptor in your policy would be something along the lines of, if there's a catastrophic failure of an HVAC unit, or if there is flooding in the library, or if there is some other type of a situation that is not foreseeable, you would be able to dip into that line and use it. But if you were to use that emergency fund and either wait for something to break and then use that funding for it, or use the money inappropriately by pulling it out for general repairs or maintenance, then that would be kind of against the point of having that as a reserve policy.
Okay.
Each library, you kind of have to make your own decisions on how you're going to work with reserve funds. And I know that, Lisa, in your situation, working with a municipality, there may be some differences of opinions on what you should have for it. But again, like we were talking about when Jessica mentioned, if you have your facilities plan, you have your reserve fund policy, and you say, this is the plan for these funds, it's not just like a rainy day fund, because you can't really have those, but you say, this is what this money is for, and you can show that, and you're not going above and beyond what that is, then you should be all right with those.
Okay. We don't have a facilities plan and we don't actually have a policy to go along with this.
Yeah, you're going to want a policy.
So yeah,
first.
we need to work on, I need to talk to the board and find out how they want to handle that. If it's a rainy day fund or more of a planning fund?
So so technically you can't have a rainy day fund. It has to have some type of definition that goes along with it. So
Okay.
any money that you have in reserve, it needs to be defined as what that means. So
That's not.
in ours, we have a line down at the bottom because we created a contingency reserve fund because of our state aid, which you never know year to year what that is going to look like. So we have a contingency reserve. These funds are established to financially insulate the system in the event of a significant cut to state aid or shortfalls to other funding sources. But you'll notice all of our other funds, they all have definitions next to them. The Office of the State Comptroller, if they saw like, oh, this fund is just, we're just saving some money just in case, they wouldn't view that as appropriate. There should be some type of designation that goes along with it.
For me to do what I want.
Yeah, well, that's not really a specific enough designation. Sorry, Lisa.
Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions? No, moving on. Okay, so we have a couple different things that happen when it comes to any type of facilities, and everybody may be thinking a little bit different when you signed up for this workshop. In terms of wondering, this may be something as easy as putting a facilities plan together and working on smaller scale maintenance, or it could be that you are planning a larger scale construction project. And I want to talk a little bit about the larger scale construction project. What I'm going to give you is nowhere near everything that you need to know. But I just want to make sure that people have an understanding of some of the more popular terms that are used, and then some other things that go into a larger scale construction project, just so you've heard it at least once and you can kind of think through what you may need. So when you are looking at some type of large scale construction project, I have on here a list of people who should be involved with that project team. Your first one is going to be some type of an attorney, because whether you're a municipal library who is fighting over space, or you're a school district library who is purchasing land, or if you are dealing with just contractors in general, you're probably going to want some type of legal support involved with it. This legal support may range. You may only need them once or twice for certain bid documents. You may need them on retainer for the whole project, depending on what it is. But before you start working with a large scale construction project, you should figure that you're going to have some type of legal fees involved. The next one on the list is an architect. So this is going to be the person, group, whatever, designing your building, renovation, or space. So there's a whole history of various architects who have worked with libraries in the past. And I would caution everybody, as you are going through the interview process of looking at architects, to have your director reach out to other directors across the system to get some opinions on them, because the peers that we have across the system have all kinds of working relationships with various architects. And you can, of course, take all that information with a grain of salt, but there have been issues with various firms in the past, or individuals, contractors, everything else. So it would make a good amount of sense for your director to reach out and talk to other directors to say, hey, who did you use? How did it work out? Were you happy, unhappy, things like that. So you can kind of get an idea of what that is. You don't have to go out for bid for architect services. You can do an RFP process if you want, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But this is mainly reaching out and kind of interviewing those architect firms to see what they want. If going with an architect is going to be much easier than doing a design yourself and working directly with contractors on that one, but it's up to you ultimately how you want to work that out. Contractors, so these are the people or firms who will be actually doing the work, installing, renovating, whatever. Generally, if depending on how it's set up, sometimes contractors will work under the architect. Sometimes if you're working on your facilities plan, you're probably going to be contracting with contractors individually in order to get some information. And on the line, you can add a line to your facilities plan where you can actually mention what contractor you got the quote from, or maybe who did the work in the past, just so you can track that information over time. That may be a good idea too. Clerk of the works. So this is a person who is typically, they're either employed by the architect, which happens a lot, or maybe the library has an independent clerk of the works, or they may have somebody who has architect experience or construction experience who acts as the clerk of the works. And this one is mainly an individual who represents the interests of the client, in this case, the library, to making sure that the qualities, workmanship, everything's accordance to the design, the information, the specifications, engineering drawings, all that stuff. They want to make sure that the project stays on scope. They want to make sure that there isn't any crashing or gold plating or anything like that that happens within the project itself. So they're the ones that are looking out for you as a client so that everything is done according to the specifications that you want. Because when it comes to large scale construction, even if there may not be any malicious intent, but there's a lot of moving pieces. So sometimes it makes it a little difficult to keep track of everything. And that's another plug for project managers. So these are the person, the firm overseeing the overall project process of the project. This can be handled by the architect for smaller projects. Another question that you're probably going to want to ask them when you interview them. But I've seen libraries who have a board member serve as the project manager, or maybe even the director, depending on the scope of the project. And you want to make sure that the library team, the board, the library, the director, any staff who may be involved with this, you want to make sure that you have an internal team, because you don't want to lose control of the project. Sometimes you'll get an architect, a contractor, some outside individual who will come in and think this is what I want to do for the library. And you should really have that authority and that control to make sure that the design or what's happening is truly what you want as an organization. So these are just some various individuals who may be involved in the process. Any questions about these guys? Nothing at all. Okay. The next two sections, I always put these in here because I always find that people have a lot of questions about this, because once you are at the point where you are ready to have work done, you need to make sure that you source or procure the contracts in a fair and reasonable way. So the Office of the State Comptroller governs procurement, and the idea behind procurement is just seeking competition. So making sure that the businesses that are vying for your business have a fair way of bidding for your project, and to make sure that the library is following all the policies required to make sure that you are just following the rules when it comes to it. If you, this is a great little document here. This is the seeking competition and procurement. And this document comes straight from the Office of the State Comptroller, and it outlines all the stuff that you need to consider with procurement policies. It talks about who's responsible for seeking procurement. It talks about the various thresholds that you need to consider, because different dollar amounts are going to require different types of activities. Whoops, sorry, there we go. They're going to require different types of activities. So if it's over $30,000 for public works, then you would have to go out to bid. If it's under $5,000, maybe it's at the director's discretion, depending on what your policy actually states. So before you go out and do anything, you're going to want to make sure that you have your procurement policy in place. I'll post the system one here. Our procurement policy I took right from this competition and procurement, so it's up to standards with the Office of the State Comptroller. procurement policies are required to have policy guiding their procurement procedure, even for services not subject to competitive bidding. So this means if you are looking to hire somebody that will only do $10,000 worth of work that isn't subject to public bidding, but you would still, your policy should still state what you need for those types of situations. So if we take a look, I have our policy here that you can steal anytime you want. But if you take a look at the fee schedule on here, it tells you all of the stuff that you would need to do with just the dollar amounts. So if we take a look at public works, so this is building up to 35,000 is at the discretion of the executive director. Over 35,000 requires request for proposal or request from quote for approval by the Board of Trustees, a minimum number of 3 quotes. And then all these different dollar amounts tells you what you need. This is really nice to have because when you have these, you just follow your policy and it makes the process much smoother, much cleaner. So if you're going into construction, you're going to want to make sure that you have this handy. And this is just a general procurement policy. The other part that goes along with procurement is public bidding. So this is another area that gets a lot of questions because people going out to bid can be a pretty significant task. When you are working on a larger project, oftentimes, and this is another thing to ask your architect, but they'll actually do the bidding documents for you, which is really great because then you don't have to worry about a lot of them. The 6-item list here is some things that you're going to have to take into consideration when you're talking about any type of public bidding. So if you're going out for a large scale construction projects and you need to get some requests for proposals, it could be an RFP, RFQ, there's all kinds of RF documentation, but you'll want to make sure that you have a legal notice. There's specifications in law for what you need to do in terms of the legal notice that goes out. So you have a time frame for responses, what your project's going to do, deadlines, all that stuff, specs and drawings if you had it. Instructions to bidders, so all the stuff that they need to know. So it could be defining terms, making sure that all the bid documents are available, having them take a look at the site, having pre-bid conferences with people so they have an opportunity to do a walk around. Typically in there, they're going to ask questions. You should know all the questions and then answer those for everybody. Again, you want to make sure that you want to make sure that everybody's treated fairly through the process. You're going to have some legal compliance issues. This may be where your legal counsel comes into play because there's legal constraints with prevailing wage, general municipal law, Wick's law, which libraries fall under and could cause some issues, and any other type of legal issue that may come up. Project management, so you're going to want to make sure that it's understood when the work is going to start, any progress schedules, how coordination between contractors is going to happen, all that good stuff. That's why it's nice to have the architect involved with these. Any type of change order, so how will that be communicated? If there's questions, and again, if there's questions, making sure that these are answered for all bidders, and then having some type of insurance requirements for any type of contractors that are coming on site, because you want to mitigate all risks for the library when it comes to any type of insurance need for offsite contractors coming on and doing work. This is a very formal process going out to bid. You want to make sure all actions are documented so you can hold up and say we did everything according to the law in case somebody wants to push back on something. Like, let's say that there was an issue with prevailing wage, or somebody wants to claim that you didn't follow Wick's law, or there's some other type of situation that that would cause legal issues. You want to make sure that you have all of that documented so it's not going to be a problem. But again, this is a legal part, so you're going to want a lawyer, and your architect will probably help out with this too, depending on who you have. But that's one of those upfront questions that you're going to want to ask. Any questions on this stuff? Nothing at all.
Yes, this is
Jean.
Jean McCreary.
Yeah. What's up?
Yes, I do. Does construction require following minority-owned business requirements? Do you happen to know?
So the construction aid program that Suzanne's going to talk about later doesn't have an MWBE requirement. And the library itself, so your library wouldn't have a requirement unless you have it included in your policy somewhere. Sometimes it can help with different types of funding depending on where it's coming from, but there's nothing that says libraries are required to use any type of MWBE contractors.
Thank you. Very
Sure.
helpful.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions? Usually someone has one about prevailing wage. Everybody's good on prevailing wage? If you're unsure if your library needs to pay it, contact the Department of Labor and get a ruling. Oftentimes an association libraries may not be required to pay prevailing wage, but depending on where your money comes from, you may be required to. So your safest bet is to get in touch with the Department of Labor and get a ruling ahead of time, because that's going to make things a lot easier. People don't like it when I say that, but I'm in the business to keep you as safe as possible, and that's what's going to do it. Okay. Some general advice when it comes to construction is you're always going to want to take a look at the library with an outsider perspective. We fall into this habit of going into these buildings for board meetings, or maybe you're a director and you see it every day and kind of forgetting about all the issues that pop up. It's very easy for us as humans to habituate to situations the more we're exposed to them. So if you can't take yourself out of that perspective, because it can be hard, it may be nice to have people come in and just do an informal space audit, and you can see what's going on in there, what's causing issues. Obviously, with the items that I talked about at the top with HVAC systems and stuff like that, that's all easy because it's just timing. When you need to replace those, but kind of the comfort that those other aspects of the library, those ones are the ones that you have to take a look at and figure out, how is this working? Doing space audits can just be watching people and how they use the space too. Are people constantly pulling the comfy chairs over to the wall with the outlet? Well, maybe that means you either A, need more outlets, or B, you just need to rearrange your seating so people can use it with their space. So just watching how people are using the space. Understanding the staff perspective, so always paying attention to how staff use the space, because not only will they have an idea of how patrons use it, but they also have an important understanding of the workflow of the library too. And if you're working with an architect and they come in and they're going to build you this gorgeous library, but there's zero room to process new books or to return books, or for two staff to be working at a desk, that's going to be a real problem. So you want to make sure that design doesn't get prioritized over the actual workflow, and working with staff perspectives can help out with that a lot. You should always be maintaining, fixing, or improving the library space. And again, that's a good reason to have that facilities committee in place so you don't lose track of that. And then taking responsibility for the building. It is your most expensive asset. And it will be over time. It costs a lot of money to maintain buildings, particularly old buildings. So you're going to want to make sure that you have that up to, you want to make sure you have it as best as possible as you're taking care of it. When we're talking about various projects, whether it's small or big, you have a few different funding options that you can use. In hindsight, I probably should have moved the reserve fund policy and stuff down here, but maybe next time I run it. I have 3 areas on here which libraries typically use for funding facilities projects. We have bonds. So this is if there's going to be some type of major expansion or renovation, you can take a look for public approval. So you can borrow the funding from a financial institution or municipal bonds. This can also happen through DASNY, the Dormitory Authority, and that's where construction aid comes from. So you're not authorized to issue municipal obligations, but you can work with the financing institutions to be able to do it. So oftentimes what will happen is if it's a municipal library, they will bond on behalf of the library. Maybe a school district will bond on behalf of the library. Bonding's pretty complicated. This is one of those areas where you absolutely have to have an attorney in order to make sure it happens. If you come to me and say, hey, Ron, we want to do a bond vote, I'll say, great, hire an attorney because it does become quite complicated. So it's going to be something that you're going to want to make sure that you have in place. Okay, next is capital campaigns. So this is fundraising for library construction. Association libraries, you can do all the fundraising you want. That's fine. Be realistic with your fundraising. I know that there are some that they need to raise $500,000 for an expansion, and they expect to raise that money within a year or two before they fill out that construction aid application. If you are take a look at your past fundraising activities, if you haven't been able to raise that money in the past like that, I would assume that you're not going to be able to do it now. So just be very realistic on what you're going to be able to accomplish through a capital campaign. Public libraries, you do have limitations when it comes to fundraising, because there are situations that can cause issue with appropriate use of public funds. So even there's nowhere that authorizes nor doesn't authorize, but there are areas that say public dollars cannot be used in any type of campaign. That is true for capital campaign, political campaigns, or anything like that. So you have to watch out for that. And then the third funding source that we have on here is the construction aid program. Suzanne, you want to give a quick just overview of the aid program, maybe give a little plug for your upcoming workshop that you have coming up?
Yeah, so we're going to be doing our state aid for library construction info session in January this year. Typically it's held in March, but what we realized that coming out of COVID, it's been a lot harder for people to get like contractors and just people to come out and give quotes and do work at libraries. So we've kind of expanded the length of the program a little bit more to give libraries time to get everything they need in order to apply. So we're going to do that info session next month. It will go over the entire program, what projects are qualified, what projects don't, and then the timeline. And if you're not ready to apply this year and you're thinking maybe you're going to apply in the future, it's still good to attend this because it will go over that timeline, which is pretty much the same year to year as far as the months. The dates might just change. Instead of like December 5th, it might be December 10th the following year. But it's always good to kind of come and get an idea of what that timeline is. Especially too, if it's your first time through, when you apply, you don't get the money till a whole year later. So even just knowing that information can be really helpful to libraries. I have updated, we have a page on Owl Docs that has been updated. That's accessible to library directors. So directors, you can share the information from that page with your trustees. And as we get more information for the next grant cycle from the state, I'll continue to update that page. But the first step would be coming to the workshop on January 10th. You can register for that now. And I guess that's all I have to say for now, right? Just a teaser.
Suzanne, who would you recommend attend this one? Just directors? Do you want trustees there?
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely good if directors and trustees can attend to get together, because usually, typically, it's a little bit different at every library, but the 2-point people on the application is the director and the trustee. So it's just important, I think, that both understand what's going on. If a trustee is the only one handling it, that trustee maybe terms off the board in the middle of a project, then maybe the director's not too sure what's going on, and vice versa if the director were to leave. It's just good if there's 2 people from each library that are pretty familiar with the construction aid program.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. So I tried to keep this as light as possible tonight because I assumed that everybody would have kind of questions, and I didn't want to assume that people were at a certain stage in what they're looking at in terms of their facility. So With that being said, just kind of a light glossing over the various areas, where do you need more information or what specific questions do you have? And you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to say goodbye to our recording attendees, just in case we have some questions. So thanks everybody who is listening to the recording. If you have questions, feel free to follow up with me.